Hi, this is Dr. Randy Bock. Today's December 29, 2021, and it's going to be 2022 in a couple of days, as we know. So you're going to have to learn a whole new year of COVID, unbelievably so. It's really kind of amazing to me that this has been kind of lingering and carrying on, and we get boosters on top of boosters. And it's just a funny thing. I keep mentioning that if you were to get a flu shot, you would get this year's flu shot. If you got last year's flu shot, the doctor would theoretically be, committing malpractice if there were a new one around. With the flu, they tend to come up with one every year based on the current variant, the strain that's out. And they used to have names from places. Now they go with more prosaic H3N1, H2, N5, etc. It used to be the Hong Kong flu, the Shanghai flu, and so forth. By those criteria, this would, of course, be the Wuhan coronavirus, the Wuhan flu, or whatever you want to call it, China. But we have the more prosaic name COVID. It's a kind of a funny category. The previous one was called SARS, sudden acute respiratory disease in 2003. It came and it went, and there was very little else mentioned about it. It's very curious why that one didn't become the worldwide pandemic that this did. It could be that it lingered and it attenuated it. It had all the various Greek letter strains that we have seen here. And just people didn't measure them. They didn't have the PCR. They didn't have the lateral flow testing. They didn't have the testing apparatus in general, and people maybe had other things on their mind. There was probably less world travel, less travel from China per se, which was not quite the economic juggernaut it is now. But the fact that coronavirus 1 was released into the world environment with very little in the way of repercussion thereafter. I mean, there were some serious illnesses and some deaths. But it didn't turn into a pandemic. I mean, I think it's a very curious question why that is and was. Is this one so very different from that one? I don't think so. I think most of what's different is our approach to it and the way we kind of continue on, carry on, perseverate with our, war against the virus. This is a war that has been going on too long and has been, I guess makes a lot of people feel active and interested and as if they're doing something about something. I think it coincides with a lot of other nebulous and unspecific, battles that we're having against, unseen foes. And, the climate change comes to mind. You can't really kind of quantify it or qualify it. It's a tornado. It's this, it's, it's tsunami. It's, whatever, certain weather patterns. Gets warmer, it gets colder, the icebergs shrink, they expand, ice caps, and so forth. It's difficult when there's not an actual quantifiable measurement by which you can prove or disprove a theory. COVID has some of that. I think we're a little bit hampered by the fact that, we're in the middle of whatever this thing is. There was maybe better perspective or again, probably a little less caring about it back in 2003. I'd have to go back and check the news. What were the top stories that day? I assume we were starting the war in Afghanistan, or maybe ramping up to going to Iraq at the time. I think Afghanistan was a year or two before. So the world maybe had other geopolitical issues, and relatively now we are in somewhat of a quiescent phase regarding wars and skirmishes. And so I think the human appetite for something carries on. Sometimes I personally have like a Jones, a need to, have another football game, for instance, or another, kind of tilt of people going at each other and so forth. So after, I follow the Patriots, but after the Patriots game is done, win or lose, I suppose worse when you lose, you're kind of down, you're looking for something else to kind of chew on, to gnaw on. And I think a lot of our, our great minds are activated that way. And they're looking for something, and they want to move civilization towards where they want it to be. And coronavirus is a very useful thing for that purpose. It's obviously has a globalist intent. I think it's reasonably justified to note that many countries and far disparate places wound up with the same type of I think, very flawed approach to the virus of locking down and withdrawing rather than taking it head on. The places that did at the time, the UK and Sweden, were met with approbation and scorn, and it happens here in Florida and other states that have been relatively more open. The data, such as they are, do not show that the lockdowns have worked. In fact, they've been deleterious in many different ways for general mental health and the health of the populace. And the Democratic governors in the U.S. that were applauded for their bravery in dealing with COVID, they're up front. Andrew Cuomo, frankly, was a top presidential possibility for the succeeding election. When he made his various dictates, he's gone. Governor Newsom did the same thing, and I think Whitmer and whoever the governor, I think Wolf in Pennsylvania, they all did the same thing of bringing infected people back into the nursing home. So Cuomo was gotten rid of for whatever reason. He was not any more useful. I'm not sure his peccadillos with the ladies necessarily is categorically worse than a lot of other governors. Who knows? But he was chosen to be take the hit. But I think it was for other reasons. I think it was because he was no longer useful, and I think he was too much associated with the probably literally 10,000 deaths or more excess amongst the elderly of for bringing people back into the nursing homes. Anyway, that's somewhat old news. I'd like to kind of go over what's going on now. Omicron is just not that big a deal. I think the vaccine is somewhat irrelevant to it. It looks to be that the various boosters have somewhat lost their force and their efficacy. This is completely understandable. Basically, it's in my view, last year's flu shot for this year's flu. The flu doesn't quite have the episodic strains going sequentially through the Greek alphabet as coronavirus does, because coronavirus in this point is a human-to-human virus, and influenza is human-to-human also, but it has a reservoir in domestic pigs at the very least, and probably fowl as well. So it has kind of like a rest period and then comes back, stronger, like a horror movie. You've kind of like let everything quiet and then boom, comes back out and scares you. And COVID, again, I used the body surfing example last week. It has to be, in order to keep passing just from people to people, it has to be, somewhat light so that people can carry it around without falling down themselves. If you have too heavy person being carried by the crowd, then it collapses. That the whole crowd collapses with the whatever the singer or something is being carried, and doesn't really pass around, doesn't ripple through the same way it might otherwise. So Omicron is mild. I'd recommend you and commend you to go look back at last week's coronavirus conversation with Dr. Nathi Mladla from South Africa, who has a great perspective. They have a month lead on us in South Africa, and he's in the largest city, Johannesburg. And his experience with Omicron, and they've been echoed elsewhere, is that it's pretty much mild, kind of maybe a bad cold, maybe not a bad cold, maybe just a regular cold. I've been asking people here, and there are a lot of people I know who have, gotten it or encountering people with it. And, here and there, people say, oh, it's like the flu, but nobody has been hospitalized that I know. There are a lot of cases out and about of Omicron because it is transmissible like the common cold. And we're indoors now. We're kind of breathing the same air. And so masks or not, or whatever, behaviors people are doing, the thing's still passing around. It's transmissible because virons are tiny. Unless you kind of have a scuba gear on all the time, you're going to come across this. So, the presentation is interesting to me, and I'm going to try to, get through tonight's session pretty quickly because it's getting to the holiday season. We have some other things going on, getting ready for parties and whatnot. Let's see if I can make sense of all this for you. Let's see. All right. Well, where do I start? Well, very simply, I was going to just, when I was looking at, let's see, let me just add this here. Okay. So I was just looking at, Google for the news, and the way, I typed in Omicron deaths USA. there's very little mention of the actual deaths. I mean, they're close to zero. I mean, I think maybe there's a handful or something like that. And we've experienced Omicron now for probably a week and a half or more. There's not that much going on. Bad cold. And so what do you see instead from the New York Times? Yeah, COVID testing news and global among average global cases reach a new high, and many Europeans are scrambling for tests. U.S. daily record for cases is broken. U.S. COVID cases rise. This is kind of avoiding the actual question here of Omicron deaths. And finally, you get down to Reuters over here. And again, I think Google tweaks these algorithms, or there's a human touch to it. When I was on my smartphone looking up the same thing, maybe the sixth case or seventh one was Bloomberg, and they're not even listed here on the computer version. Bloomberg says, basically no deaths and a lot of cases and so forth. But same thing. U.S. COVID cases rise to pandemic high as Delta and Omicron circulate at the same time. This sounds horrible, doesn't it? I mean, the cases broken. So all these cases. Well, what does this even mean? So there's a lot of cold. Basically, it's wintertime. People get the cold. I just don't understand how people can go nuts over this, yet they do. I had a little bit of an exchange here. Let's see if I can find it here. But before I get to that, maybe I'll just, I'll carry on with this. Let's see. So I had a little back and forth with a colleague, friend, I guess. And let's see if I can just make this let's see if I can make this better. How do I do this? Full screen. Here we go, full screen. Okay, so this is, I'm trying to get the squash and tennis club to be normal. When I say normal, maybe go back to even what we had just a couple of months ago. But no, they want to have people wear masks when they're playing squash, unless they have gotten yet another booster, the most recent one. This is not really boosting anything except last year's, the ancestral version of COVID. The sequences have gone on. I compared it to like the Baldwin brothers. If you had a restraining order for Alec, and then Daniel shows up at one point, and then Stephen, and then I think James, whatever the Baldwin brothers' others names are, you would be able to recognize and keep away Alec because you have a firm restraining order, and police have been taught that. They got pictures and so forth. They're not going to let Alec Baldwin into your party and shoot anybody. But Stephen comes in, and they're actors, so they're going to be able to try to get through the security that you have, and they're going to do so. And this is what we're doing now. So we're getting more restraining orders against Alec when we're down to whatever the last Baldwin brother is. And so they're different. They're just, have similarities, no doubt. They're Baldwins, but they're not the same one. They don't have the same virulence. They don't have the same danger. They're not all Alec Baldwin. And so I got I was trying to make this point by bringing to the attention of my squash and tennis club the South African doctor's video showing that, we have a heads up. We can see what Omicron is. There's 65 million people or something like that in South Africa, and they're pretty much not vaccinated. I mean, they have a very low rate. I think it's 25, maybe 30%, and certainly a lot of areas are lower, and based on poverty and or education level, a lot of people are not getting the vaccine. Again, it didn't really make much of a blip in hospitalizations or death, morbidity, and so forth with Omicron. So this is the mildest version yet. I think that's inarguable, and we'll come to some graphs on that later. But the back and forth I had here, it's like he brought up emergency rooms in the USA are now already overflowing. This is just, he had no data for this. I asked about it. I think it's actually very hard to find for some reason. You can find hospitalization. You can't find ER usage and numbers, whether compared to, last December or December of 3 years ago. So this stuff gets stated, and he's getting this from the headlines, and there's no justification. We've had a few letters more back and forth, and I don't think there's been any justification of that. National Guards have been activated is his next comment, and I have my replies here. I'm not going to read them in detail, but this is, insofar as National Guard have been called up in certain places, this is somewhat irrelevant. It has to do with the fact that they've been firing or letting go people that were last year's, essential workers. Thank you, essential workers, hospital workers, and so on. And now, if you don't want to get your next booster, you're gone. So they've been bringing National Guard as a means to address a problem they self-created. And then he's talking about COVID symptoms and so forth. But again, this is the previous ones. This is the mildest one, and health effects. This is really, I don't really want to go too far into this, but we go back and forth about one thing or another. I'll probably get rid of this, move on from this, and talk about some other things. But it's well, maybe I'll just go to the slides. But the kind of the level of vituperation is kind of like a two-sided view of the world. And here's one side. This is probably a smart guy. He was associated with Live Science, so he's a science writer, independent health and science journalist, and why he wears still masks up. You can read this article. I can send the link for it. There's reasons, but it's silly. It's polite. Omicron, the virus is airborne. Virus has always been airborne. We haven't always worn masks. Masks work, well, to a certain extent for a certain length of time, but they also have issues and problems. And we're going to get to some of these here. I'm going to maybe start, make a slideshow out of this. Let's see. So that is showing. This is a kind of a health club. It's just from like a day or two ago. Everybody's masked, pretty much. 90% of people are masked. Young people who don't really get ill from COVID, they're wearing masks, they're wearing on the courts. I see people wearing kind of a mask while swimming. These are adults that just a few days ago were not wearing masks. What swayed them? What happened in the meanwhile? What calamity? What catastrophe? Well, we see this. This is actually from last summer. I think this is called copy pasta, like spaghetti, which is kind of a joke on copy paste, where people have been, I guess, influenced enough, or they've been, part of the crowd enough that they take what somebody says. This was originally from a doctor, and he wrote this line again, I think, without any reference of substantiation or numbers. And this is for Delta. I guess this is more Delta. I think some people misspell ligma and delta, sugma, whatever. But it's just, people wind up taking this for themselves, and they reprint this. And this is the copy pasta movement, where people become the army that magnifies a statement. So I think it's kind of interesting that my medical colleagues, an MD, PhD, researcher and so forth, and a scientist, he assumes, and I assume, he said exactly the same thing. They were getting crushed. And in this case, it was emergency room overflow. Here we see it as well from CNN. Expert warns of a viral blizzard. If you haven't seen the video of this, somebody from, I think, Media Research Center or something like that, they did a clip, and one newscaster after another uses the same phrase, viral blizzard, whatever that happens to be. So they do exactly the same thing as this on the news. They all just basically do copy paste, but again, the term, if you want to look at the hashtag, it's called copy pasta. And they just do this over and over again. And then everyone, as a result, we get this, everyone has been mentally copy pasted or copy pasted, and they all believe this. They're waiting, they're expecting the blizzard. The kids, the parents, and so forth, these are young people for most part, young parents of young kids. They don't need this. And again, parents, I assume, in this neck of the woods are 100% vaccinated and boosted and all that kind of stuff. And they're only waiting for their kids to get it too, which is an absurdity, because we don't know the long-term risks of kids getting vaccine for this. We can't know that. And kids don't have any real deleterious problems from the illness itself. Worse than, say, the flu, for which they never previously have gotten vaccinated. This is a slide from last week's show. I recommend you go look at it again. This is really the disconnect over here between Omicron cases in South Africa and fatalities. So fatalities are in yellow, cases are up here in white. There's pretty much nothing going on, and they had it a month ahead of us. This is a case of Israel, which is admirable in so many ways, and so many of the wars they fought. They're beleaguered, they pull together. They're doing that in the absence of an actual war, and this is kind of a meme with the clown. I don't know if you've ever seen this meme before. Israel after 1 COVID shot. Now they're after 4 COVID shots. They keep redefining it. But even at the same time, that there's really nothing going on here. They're recommending another booster, and they're banning travel. COVID curbs widen. And here's the deaths in Israel. These are the cases. They were high back in October. Maybe, who knows, they'll go up slightly. But, this is not that much going on. So they're doing, and the evidence is minimal of any issues and so forth, and the actions are maximal. And here's the prime minister wearing a mask. These things get taken off 2 seconds after the TV show. This is from a site called covariant.com. This is from probably earlier this month. We see South Africa over here with the purple. This is the Omicron variant. So we weren't really having it a month ago. Apparently now 65% of cases in the US are Omicron. They do this probably by group batch testing and so forth. In other places, again, Delta was in the green here, and they might very well get Omicron. But again, who cares really, because it doesn't seem to be very much of anything. This is the same picture, just without the other previous variants. This is just current ones. So this is a slide regarding South Africa, the proportion of COVID cases hospitalized, and Omicron is dwarfed by Delta. And this, again, pretty much an unvaccinated country. So even absent vaccine, so you're going to maybe see exactly the same thing here. And I think the vaccine is somewhat of an irrelevancy. They're getting good results without vaccine for the most part in South Africa, because Omicron is just not that much of a thing. Like I've said many times, when you have just a human to human transfer viruses, they self-attenuate in order not to knock down the hosts that are going to be carrying them from person to person. So this is kind of a mishmash of slides. I apologize. Omicron in reality is like your nice golden retriever or lab or whatever he is. Omicron in the media, and Omicron amongst certain of my friends. This is where they're going, want everyone to have, kind of show booster cards and all this kind of stuff. City of Boston is making so you can't enter restaurants without a vaccination documentation. At the same time, the COVID in Massachusetts, again, showing the high number of cases from a couple of days ago, like a week ago, 6,000 cases, 0 deaths. This is kind of like an issue of your rights, and this is worth looking into, this old case law. I'm not going to spend much time reading it, but we have rights, and if you don't assert those rights, they're going to disappear. Maybe I'll just go briefly into a story from today. We had I was playing tennis, and 2 young people, college students age, came in after me, and I heard them chatting. They were talking about, we got to go through quarantine. I'm 500 miles away. The school's closing down if you don't, whatever. She had a whole bunch of issues regarding coronavirus. And so I was getting my stuff together, and I just asked her and the guys, well, absent, forget the testing for right now. Do you know anybody amongst your classmates, high school, college, whatever, who've gotten ill, like genuinely ill, aside from, cold symptoms and whatnot, from COVID? She said, no, not at all. He said the same thing. And he said, it's so silly what colleges are doing. And I said, what have you done about it? Have you done anything about it? And he's like, no. And this is where we stand. If you don't do something about it, it's just going to kind of carry on. So, my wife warns me I'm going to lose friends in my various civic, fun exercise groups by pointing all this stuff out. But I think, the emperor's new clothes. Somebody has to point it out. You can't just kind of keep going with what popular word today, inequity. You have to kind of point it out, and you have to, stand up. And I said, until you point out what's going on in the college, until you have like a hold back your tuition payments, or have, a bunch of you do so, you're going to just kind of be getting the same thing going on and on and on. So I'm just going to go over these slides very briefly. This is, you can't get ER stats very well, but hospital admissions is Germany. They had been declining in December. Same thing. This is ICU in France and Germany. A friend of mine did kindly, so I just put it up there. This is from his work as well. I'm just going to go through a meme hour really quickly. You can stop and pause any of these you want. The Census Bureau data is revealing huge shifts from basically blue states to red states, or let us say Democrat states to Republican states, places that are closed to places that are open. This is regarding the Matrix. I think there's a new Matrix movie coming out. If you're following the Matrix and you're falling in for this stuff and showing your passports, then you're part of the problem. Now, these are some. This is a libertarian meme. Nobody should be able to force decisions upon us. Well, that's not quite true. I mean, there are occasions that it occurs, but I think it's a matter of degree. So I'm not fully with Ayn Rand on this, but what's happening now is, there's tiny bits with Omicron of issues, smell, taste, but mostly it's this problem, common sense, that's been affected by COVID. I've got a picture of that guy I was showing you before. And this is a really interesting point here. It's a little bit over my head as far as philosophy goes. I'm not a Hegel expert, but Dad, why do people give up freedom for security? And you can stop and read this here. And it's the Hegelian dialectic, sweetie. And let's see, make sure I'm still, so I did not add this back to my stream. So I'm going to have to go back a little bit just to show the slides. So this is the census by COVID. This is the Census Bureau 1 matrix, and France and Germany, Omicron in the media. I apologize. So if I didn't show these adequately, that's my mistake. So let's go back. I'm not sure how far back I have to go, but here we have the cases versus cases high, deaths low, South Africa. What I mentioned about Israel, going for more and more boosters with very little going on. This is Omicron edging out, having a month's lead, at least in South Africa, very little issue. Even without vaccination, Omicron is minimal. This is the way we see Omicron, the minimal 0 deaths. The slides I mentioned my friend gave me. This is regarding people exiting the kind of lockdown states. This is the Ayn Rand quote, common sense meme here. And here we are with the Hegelian dialect. So I'm going to pass this over, but it is kind of a funny thing where people are so willing to accept what they're being told according to fear. And it's a really sad and tragic thing. Even these college kids are, theoretically amongst our brightest because they're in college after all. I recommend you stop and maybe read this, some of these slides. But this is a really sad piece. I forget where I got this exactly, but when we wear masks, I mean, this guy here, why he masks up, I think he's really avoiding, a huge one of what we're doing to kids. And imagining be a 5-year-old walking to school and you don't even get to see people's faces. I think this is really a dystopian thing we're doing to kids, and God knows how it's going to be playing out. So here, this is actually my resistance. We've had dinner parties and so forth. Maybe I shouldn't broadcast this, but it's we try to go on with life, and everything you keep being told that it's that your ideas are crazy. They don't want to do this, and then the next year they do it, and then if you're opposed to it, you're crazy. And this is from Japan. They're more on a voluntary basis, which makes sense. Here are some slides. Just this is from the tennis club. This is kind of last year's stuff, showing how absurd their rules were back then. You couldn't touch a tennis ball and then do something else. This is, from, I forget where this is, outdoor people wearing masks. You can see with the condensation that, this is not going to be doing that much. People are going to be breathing air from around each other. And if you can smell somebody's flatulence, you can get, COVID one way or another. This is a scene on one of my walks. I put this out because, basically the force of the tree, will eventually tear a brick wall down. It may take time, but you have to be that persistent force. And over here, you can see, maybe you haven't seen this, but I recommend you go research this. There's an email dump showing Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins, who's head of NIH, coordinating a propaganda exam to attack the Great Barrington Declaration. This is really crazy. They don't like what they're hearing, so they try to attack it and make sure it can't come out. I covered this, maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago. But how you phrase the conversation. These up here, you can see the giants are hit hard by COVID, but actually, this is a different way of looking at it. They're stuck in COVID protocols. Our response to COVID is really in a sense, the worst virus. And you can see a lot of this stuff here. This is absurdity. I'm sure they're both vaccinated. There's no reason to be doing this. Is all theater. This is something I could add to my profile if I wanted to. This is everywhere. It's all a matter of getting you to, think about things the way they want you to think about them. There's another, kind of Twitter meme. I'm going to just kind of pass through these without much comment, and you can stop and look at any of the ones you want to look at. And I'm going to be closing up soon. There's some scenes from the street during kind of Christmas shopping week. Young and old, masked. Fortunately, Whoopi is holding her mask. I think the Whoopi picture is kind of like, well, you might have some other health issues that are bigger than this. People have had like a year and a half to deal with some of the underlying issues. This doesn't appear to be much improved. I don't think lockdowns improve general health. They keep us from exercising, from looking and comparing ourselves with others, and kind of staying in line. But what do we get instead? We get warnings that the hospital will be overwhelmed. Not true, not happening, didn't happen in South Africa. Where does he get this kind of idea? And here's the same kind of thing as a joke. Mask mandate to flatten the horizontal line. Winter of severe illness and death. I guess instead of a viral blizzard, we have this. This is from C.S. Lewis. I think you should stop and read this. This is kind of a spiritual moment, but you have to kind of be the change. You have to do the things you want to do. And if you want to get close to your spirituality, you want to get close to the truth, you have to actually work towards it. And Silence of the Lambs is James Gum. It puts the needle in its skin, or else it wears the mask again. So I'm going to probably close with that and give you guys a break. But Happy New Year. Make sure the new year is the year that you want it to be. You have to do things. You can't just sit back. You got to be the change.